What's going on, everybody? Hope everyone is having a great night so far. I'm here with my co-host, Brad. We got a very special guest with us tonight, David Lake, a part of Inside the U, associated with 247 Sports. His name may sound familiar because he has one of the best Canes podcasts out there, Through the Smoke with Andrew Ivins. They do a great job. David, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those kind words. Appreciate it. Excited to talk some Canes with you guys.
Absolutely, David. And, it's been a roller coaster ride. Manny Diaz is kind of coaching tenure at the University of Miami. I remember Randy Shannon, Al Golden, Mark Richt. This one is completely different from the others. How would you assess year two for Coach Diaz at the University of Miami?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the recency bias might be negative, but I think if you take a step back and take a look at the season as a whole, I think, all Canes fans, I think everyone needs to realize, and I think everyone would agree, that obviously this season was a step forward for the program. We always want to see more. It would have been nice to see a strong finish, of course. But really, when we think back to what Miami was in 2019 and what this team had to deal with in 2020 with the pandemic and everything that brought with it, I think this second season for Manny Diaz was a very encouraging step forward. The big challenge he was faced with was getting the offense fixed, right? And he made a ton of changes, bringing in a new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach, new wide receivers coach, new quarterback in De'Aaron King. And, when you look at the final numbers compared to 2019, particularly just points per game, right? That's the bottom line of offense, how you judge any offense. They were 9 points per game better. And I would argue that this 2020 schedule was tougher than what they faced in 2019 because, in 2019, in a regular season, you're facing an FCS program where you can have a game where you score 50, 60, 70 points, and that really can skew your average, right? Points per game. So Miami didn't get that this year. They played more ACC games. They played more Power 5 games than they did in 2019. So it's a tougher schedule. The production was better on offense. Now, we did see the defense slip. Can't deny that. Also, too, he fixed the special teams. I think that's not something that can be overlooked, too. And, on the recruiting side of things, I do think he leveled up. I think he took a step forward with this recruiting class, landing 2 5-star guys. Best prospect in Dade County, Leonard Taylor. Best prospect in Broward County, James Williams. So overall, I do think Manny took a nice step forward in leading the program in 2020. Now, he needs to do that again in 2021. The trajectory needs to continue, and I think the pieces are there to do that. So there are expectations now moving forward, and we'll see what he can do with it then.
You bring up a lot of good points, David, and you brought up the word step, and I wanted to bring that word up again because I think as Cane fans, we ultimately want this ultimate gratification where we're wanting to have success and be the Alabamas, the Clemsons overnights. But we got to understand it's not the leaps that we're taking. We're taking steps towards it. You mentioned 2019 to 2020, how we fixed the offense. And now we're slowly going into 2021. And another thing that Manny Diaz has done is not only fix the issues that he addresses in the offseason, but it seems like De'Aaron King kind of started this trend of running it back, right? Finally getting players that need to stick with the program another year and kind of benefit for staying, not only from themselves to get the draft stock up, but to kind of mentor and help the younger guys in the position groups. And I think that's a big key. Going straight off the bat, man, with the news that we had today, David, a lot of people in the chat want to kind of get down to it with the N'Kosi Perry announcement of pretty much saying that he is going to be returning to Miami. Do you possibly think that he's returning to Miami to actually play football, or do you think it could be something that Gary Furman reported earlier as far as just finishing his 3 classes and kind of leaving from that standpoint?
Yeah, I would expect him. I think he's coming back to graduate and go through spring football. So, there is a plus to that, right? These receivers, these offensive linemen, even defensively, right? The corners, the safeties get to go against a quarterback the caliber of N'Kosi Perry. So there is some value to that, just him coming back for the spring. So yeah, I mean, I do think I know he's very close to graduating. He should get that degree, right? And then I think it's fair for him once again to explore his options in the portal. And I do think he's going to have options. And if he wants to make the jump, then no one can hate on him for doing that.
Now, Paul, before you chime in, I have one other question to that, David. We're hearing the value of what N'Kosi Perry coming back for the spring could do for the program. But what I want to look at is the other side of it, right? So a couple things. One, we don't know if D'Eriq King's healthy. So if he's not healthy by spring, let's say N'Kosi Perry does just play for the spring and he still decides, hey, I want to enter the transfer portal after. You are now pretty much losing first-team reps in spring practice with possibly your starting quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke moving forward, and possibly even a guy like Jake Garcia could possibly get some first-team snaps as well. With N'Kosi Perry coming back for at least the spring, do you think that hinders at all to where possibly these other guys that we were looking to see get more reps, that slowly declines? And then also about the seniority card that kind of gets played up a lot. Let's say N'Kosi Perry does stay. Does he ultimately just get the nod because he's kind of ahead as far as how long he's been here?
Yeah, so I think the point you're making with the spring is very fair and valid when you're talking about Tyler Van Dyke. So if N'Kosi Perry is there in the spring, that is probably going to be fewer first-team opportunities for Tyler Van Dyke. For Jake Garcia, I still think there would have been a little bit of a learning curve, right? Like, it's great he's coming for the spring. But when you make that jump from high school to college, it takes a little bit of time, right? But Tyler Van Dyke's been here. He was here last spring. So he's been here a while. I think he would have been ready to get those reps potentially. And then to answer your second question, yeah, I mean, if N'Kosi is here, for this 2021 season, I fully expect him to be the backup. I think he's better right now than what Tyler Van Dyke is or Jake Garcia right now. So yeah, I think that's how the depth chart would be. And again, I've kind of pounded the table making this point too. Like, if D'Eriq King is your starter and N'Kosi Perry is your backup,
it's a good 1-2 punch.
That's a good quarterback situation. You're not going to find many programs in the country that have a better quarterback situation than that.
Absolutely.
David, speaking of the quarterback room, Brad actually brought this up before we recorded the show. Jake Garcia, he always has a boot on his leg. I believe there was a previous foot injury as well. Are there any update, any status regarding Jake Garcia's foot injury going into the University of Miami?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. Like, I'm not aware of him requiring any medical procedure. Maybe he does, but I do know, like, when he was at Valdosta this year, he was limited. I believe it was an Achilles type thing. I think it was more of a strain as far as I know. But yeah, he's definitely dealing with something nagging in that regard. And I suppose there is the potential that when the UM medical staff evaluates him, maybe something does need to be done. So, but in terms of anything to report, I don't have anything to report on that right now.
I don't want to spend too much more time on quarterbacks per se, David, but the other thing that just popped in my head is we just mentioned about 3 or 4 quarterbacks on this roster that could potentially play for Miami, and we still have guys like Tate Machota, and you also have Tate Martell, who decided to come back, right? What is your opinion on those two guys? Do you see a guy like Machota pretty much maybe transferring and then maybe Tate Martell switching positions, or do you think Tate Martell in this sense could possibly just be someone that is a good quarterback scout team that could kind of much be that guy that when we play running quarterbacks, he will be the guy we practice up against, and then he's in on trick plays? Like, how do you see that situation?
So I do know, like, Matoka, as far as we know, is going to go through the spring, right? So in terms of transferring, we'll see how that goes after the spring. I'm sure he'll take the temperature on where things stand and make a decision after that. I honestly don't. I want to see more of him. The limited times I have seen him out at practice, you can't really tell much. In the limited game action we saw, what was that, against Duke? I will say he was fast. Like, he Like, he had pretty good speed. He was kind of getting to that corner pretty well for a quarterback. So I was intrigued. And then with Tate, yeah, I mean, I don't know, honestly, what to make of the Tate situation. I think conversations are going to need to be had, quite frankly, in terms of what they want his role to be and what he wants to do. As far as I understand, he still wants to play quarterback. I don't know if that option is there for him, though, to be honest with you.
For sure.
So conversations need to be had. I think when that story came out, or when that was communicated to UM was a little surprised that he wanted to come back to UM. So that's why I say, like, I think conversations do need to be had by both sides.
David, a lot of demotions and hiring this offseason. Jess Simpson is coming back on board. Blake Baker's retaining the title as defensive coordinator, but he will not be calling plays. We also lose Coach Banda. We hire Travaris Robinson. We keep DeMarcus Van Dyke from Utah State. Were you surprised by any of these moves this offseason?
I'll admit, like, I was surprised that they were able to pull off the T-Rob thing. So
Really?
when I first heard that he was kind of the guy that they were targeting, I went to the initial reaction of, oh, you guys aren't going to be able to afford T-Rob, right? But they ponied up. I don't know exactly what he's getting paid, but they ponied up. They got it done. And quite frankly, they beat out Florida. Florida wanted him. Florida wasn't able to finish off the deal, though. So that was a big win. And, I was surprised initially when they really thought they could get him, and that ended up being the case. In terms of the Blake Baker situation, honestly, it's not surprising to me at this stage, just because let's be real. Like, this is Manny Diaz's defense, right? And I don't think he's at the point where he wants to give up his defense. He wants to still control that side of the ball, and he wants to have a defensive coordinator that, he knows, and he knows will run exactly the type of defense he wants to run, which I think is fine, and I think that's fair. So in terms of the retaining of Blake Baker, I know the fan base has a hunger to, move in a different direction, and I get that after that North Carolina game. I think that's a fair discussion to have. But at the same time, I do think it's fair to point out there are personnel issues, I think, on that defense. I think there's holes, at linebacker. I think there was holes at DB play, corner and safety at different times, different games during the season. There was some inconsistencies. And honestly, in that North Carolina game, you saw failures from the defensive line. And this year's Miami's defense really depended heavily on that defensive line setting the tone for the game. And that was just a bad game for that D-line, and everything fell apart behind them as well. So I get it. Like, if the fan base wants to get rid of Blake Baker, I understand it. But I think what Manny is telling us is it's more of a personnel issue than a scheme issue. And honestly, too, the announcement of him taking over the play calling, in my opinion, is more of a PR move, kind of taking pressure off Blake. And, quite frankly, Manny Diaz taking that on and, essentially telling the players too, like, hey, I'm going to be your coach. And so if you're going to mess up with the head coach, it's going to be bigger issues than if you mess up for the defensive coordinator. And in terms of the play calling, there were games, right? We all saw it. There were games where Manny Diaz was taking over the play calling anyways. Now, the difference maybe now is maybe Manny Diaz is going to be doing it the whole game, right? Which is probably a good thing, right? So I get it if if fans are disappointed that Blake Baker's returning, but ultimately Manny Diaz wants to run this defense, and he has proven to be a good defensive coordinator. So I think it can work, and I'm curious to see how it goes. And if it doesn't work in 2021, I think it's pretty obvious that changes, with the defensive coordinator will come.
Correct. And I think he pretty much put all the eggs in one basket for this season, kind of pretty much is betting on himself to kind of take over the load for his boys, so to speak. But I think what gets lost in all of this is he's not fixing the entire bruise, sort of say, but he's putting a nice Band-Aid on things to where, yes, like you mentioned, our defensive pass rush this past season lacked only if our DNs were kind of much doing the work. So what does he do? He goes and gets Jess Simpson, who was probably our best defensive line coach that we had in the past 5 to 10 years as far as actual pass rush, whether it's the ends or the tackles. And if you look at this roster coming up, it seems like our defensive tackles is going to be the strength. Yeah. So you kind of pair him with the guy that produced the best with our defensive tackles in Simpson. And instead of losing Todd Stroud, you in a sense put him back in the role that you originally had him for, to where now where Miami fans, they're kind of throwing their hands in the air, mad that Manny Diaz is taking over the defense. But what they don't realize is when Manny was taking over the defense, our defense was a legit top 25 defense every single year.
Yeah.
And a lot of fans also forget that many head coaches also is the play caller, whether it be offense or defense, and not only in college football, but in the NFL. So when you have a guy like Todd Stroud that could kind of come in and take over some of the head coaching roles, so to speak, and situations where Manny needs to delegate more to the defense, that is being done. And then you look in the back end, he's still able to keep your local guys like the Telly Lockett's, and now with DeMarcus Van Dyke kind of getting pushed into that cornerback role, he's able to now get recognized on a national level for the things he was doing behind the scenes the past couple of years. And I think that's very interesting. To me, the more interesting out of all this was keeping Mike Rump in a sort of sense, putting him in that recruiting role, where he's pretty much just only involved in recruiting. From what we've kind of seen the past 3 or 4 years, he hasn't really been the best recruiter. And from what I've heard from some of the high school players, he's not really the most comfortable guy to talk to. He's kind of awkward at times. So I'm really curious to see how that works out. And my question to you, David, is were you at all surprised that a guy like Telly Lockett didn't get promoted at all through all this?
I think for that to happen, a spot would have needed to open up on the offensive side, right? Manny Diaz didn't feel like that move needed to be made, and so, it didn't happen. Do I think it could happen maybe in the future if one of those offensive coaches decides to move on after next year? Yeah, I think he would be one of the top candidates to fill a running backs role or a tight ends coach role. Like, again, if those guys decide to move on to a different situation. And to your point with the defensive coaches, one thing I've wondered or thought about, and I'm not saying this was the case, but I do wonder, you had all these veteran seniors come back, right? I wonder if they would have wanted to come back if Manny did make a defensive coordinator change, right? Like, would guys want to come back and play for a defensive coordinator they don't know? I would probably say some of those guys wouldn't want to do that. I'm not reporting that. Like, I don't know if that is the case, but I would assume that having Blake return and having Manny, proclaimed to have a bigger role on the defense made it more attractive for those guys to come back as well. So I do think that's a positive maybe to take from it as well.
And I think my question that I think most Cane fans are kind of asking themselves in all this, yes, it's a great sign that most of these seniors have came back, but as Miami fans, we kind of always play devil's advocate and we look at the bad things before the good things, right? And I think the other question I have in mind, along with many other Cane fans, is what is next year going to be different from last year as far as playing the seniors over other guys? Because, I mean, you look at the guys like Jared Williams, Zach McLeod, possibly Amari Carter. We haven't heard if he's coming back. But, I mean, those 3 guys in particular, those are three guys where I would at least say 2 out of 3 of those guys need to absolutely make position changes if they decide to come back. And then, I mean, the last thing I want to see is a Scott Patchin over Greg Russo situation play out again this year. And we have someone like Zach McLeod getting first-team reps at defensive end, where we still have guys like Cam Williams, Chance Williams, and some of these other guys that we haven't seen more of, and they're kind of just sitting patiently waiting till that 4th or 5th game, and then it's like, boom, we had another gem in the back that we haven't been using. My question to you, David, is what makes you believe that seniority thing is going to change moving forward?
So I think the counterpoint to, I think what the coaches would tell you in response to that is this past season, they had an off season where the whole spring got canceled, right? And so that was going to be an opportunity to develop the young linebackers that they are high on. They're high on Avery Huff. They're high on Tyreek Austin Cave. They're high on Corey Flagg. We saw plenty of Corey Flagg this year. But not having a spring hampered those guys. They will tell you that. I think they will tell you, too, that, I think just practicing during this COVID era was different in terms of contact and all that kind of stuff. So it was hard to develop that way, too. So I think they went with older guys that they knew what they would get, right?
Comfort level.
Yeah. Whether or not that's the right thing to do, I don't know. That's up for debate, right? And I would say, Zach McLeod coming back, I don't know this to be the case, but I would assume he will get more of a look in that pass rusher type role that we saw in the Oklahoma State game, right? At least I would be disappointed if that's not the case, because I think we've seen what he has to offer at linebacker, and I think it's time to give those younger guys a chance to see what they got in that role. But yeah, and I will say this too. I'm always excited about the young guys. But I think very few and far between are the young guys necessarily always better than the veteran guys, right? Like the Greg Rousseau, Scott Patchin thing, it was frustrating. Like that was a legitimate one. But, it got fixed. It got remedied fairly quickly, right? In terms of like I would point to like Jared Williams. I don't have an issue with Jared Williams, to be honest. I have more of an issue with the guards. And so if I'm going to insert a younger guy like a Jalen Rivers, I would insert him at maybe, Ja'Kai Clark or even DJ Scaife, because quite frankly, I don't know if DJ Scaife got it done this year. But then there's also Navon Donaldson. I just think there's this notion to always toss away the older guys when I'm not sure that's necessarily the way you want to run a program when you're recruiting, because, recruits talk to guys on the team. And if guys on the team tell them, hey, I've been here for 3 or 4 years, I'm working my butt off and, I'm trying, but they're always playing the young guys, it's going to be hard to recruit in those situations. So it is a tough balance. And then also, too, you got to throw in the transfer portal era where, guys will transfer. So you have to balance a lot of stuff, and it is tough. But I think you do make a fair point with you can't always just like if guys aren't getting it done, you got to find someone that can. So I think that's fair.
Definitely.
David, like we spoke about, earlier in this show, Manny Diaz taking over play calling duties, bringing back Jess Simpson on. I feel like he's trying to bring back the band together for that 2018 season because, defensive wise, it was top 15 defense. They're number one in the nation defending third down, stopping teams from converting on third down. They only gave up 18.8 points per game. I mean, hey, if we can replicate that next season with Rhett Lashley putting up over 34 points per game, I think we can do a lot of great things. I know that we may not have the right personnel. That team was a lot more talented, defensive line wise. Gerald Willis, Joe Jackson, Jonathan Garvin. We averaged 10.5 tackles for loss. That was number one in the nation. Cornerback wise, our secondary as a whole: Jaquan Johnson at safety, Mike Jackson at corner. It's very hard to replicate our personnel. Do you think we can be successful like we were in 2018, or it's going to be just maybe we'll be better than last year?
Right. If I think if the expectations are to return to 2018, I think you're going to be disappointed because, like you said, that personnel, those guys were all drafted, right? And then at linebacker there was also Shaq and Pinkney, who are both better, quite frankly, than what they have now, right? You had Bandy as the third corner on that team, or second corner. He would slide inside at times. So. Yeah, I mean, personnel-wise, I'm a big players over scheme, right? And the players on that defense were just on a different level than what we see now at Miami. So I don't think that's fair, but I think it's fair to expect improvement, right? You can't let games like that North Carolina game happen. So I think it would be fair to expect, like, I think if you take out that North Carolina game and what are the averages from the other, 10 games from the 2020 season, whatever that comes out to be, maybe, I don't know. I think they might have allowed 25 to 24 points per game in those games when you take out North Carolina. I think that's a fair expectation. Honestly, when I look ahead, I think the identity of next year's team is going to have to rely heavily on that offense. I think, that's the strength of next year's team. So they scored 34 points per game this year. I think next year they need to score 36, 37, 38, maybe more, right? So you got to rely on that offense to, kind of play defense in a way, make it easier on that side of the ball. Because the talent level, it's good, it's solid, but it's not on that level, right? It's not on that 2018 level.
100%. Yeah, David, you bring up a lot of great points, especially specifically on players. We talk about the 2018 team, and we would kind of compare a guy like Bubba Bolden this past year to maybe someone similar to Jaquan Johnson, and we saw kind of early on that expectation might have been met, but then as the season went on, we kind of saw what the difference was between a Jaquan Johnson and a Bubba Bolden. Some of the great players on our past team the past couple of years have been transfer portal guys. This season, we haven't relied too heavily on it, but we did grab 3 transfer guys, guys in Charleston Rambo, Tyreek Stevenson, former Southridge guy, and also another former Southridge guy, DeAndre Johnson. Out of those 3 guys, David, who do you expect to make the biggest impact and why?
Well, it's interesting. I think Tyreek Stevenson is the best player, but I think if Charleston Rambo is the player they think he is, the player they think they're getting, I think he can be the biggest impact because they expect him to be a guy that can, kind of open up the deep passing game, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say that Oklahoma State loss, you could attribute it largely to the 3 drops that were had in I think all of them in the second half, right? Does Charleston Rambo drop those 3 passes? If the answer is no, and he is that guy, then that totally changes what next year's offense is. Then defenses can't stack the box because defenses think you have receivers that can't make easy catches or get separation. So that opens up your run game. It makes your entire offense much more dynamic if Charleston Rambo is a guy that can loosen up defenses on the back end, right? But again, I think Tyreek Stevenson is the best player that they've landed. I think he's an NFL guy. Do I think he's an NFL corner? I think that's up for debate, but he's an NFL DB, right? And I do think he will be Miami's best corner when you compare him to the guys that they have on the roster now. So I think it's between those 2 guys. But yeah, I mean, I think DeAndre too is a nice little addition too. I think he's kind of like a Trevon Hill type of pass rusher. So, maybe a 6 to 8 sack type of guy, which they need.
Just curious, my bad, Paul. Just curious on the DeAndre Johnson subject, because I was one of the few that there was another player that kind of went in the portal before DeAndre, and I was hoping that Miami went all in on them. He ended up going from Georgia to Florida State, obviously, and that's Jermaine Johnson. What is your comparison between Jermaine Johnson and DeAndre Johnson? Is there that much of a talent gap difference that you expect us to be getting if we would have got the other one? Or do you see them to be very similar?
I'll be real. I mean, I think Jermaine's better. Do I think it's a huge gap? I don't. But I do think Florida State probably got a better player there. And I was surprised, quite frankly, that he went to Florida State. So same. That's a good get for them. But yes, I mean, DeAndre is a nice addition. They needed a guy like that. He is one of the better defensive ends that were available in the portal this year, and Miami got him.
Cool.
Halfway through the show, we have over 230 people joining us live. Thank you very much to everyone tuning in.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button, the like button. Go check out David Lake on his Through the Smoke podcast. If you haven't yet, I don't know what you're doing, honestly. I thought everyone even knows about them. They do a great job with 247 Sports Inside the U. This offseason, guys, I feel like Miami, Coach Manny Diaz has learned from his first year as head coach. I think we're taking in transfer portal players in the sense of quality over quantity. We're not taking guys like Austin Martin. Well, Tate Martell, he's still around, but the Tommy Kennedys. Basically, we're not taking transfer portal players who may not even get a snap, literally, at the University of Miami, or just leave after a year. We're taking quality players. Charleston Rambo coming from Oklahoma, Power 5 wide receiver. I think it's going to be a really nice transition to the ACC Coastal. Tyreek Stevenson, he's coming from the SEC East. The elite competition is in the SEC, no doubt about it. There's no wide receiver he's going to face in the ACC Coastal that is better than anyone he's seen in the SEC. And also DeAndre Johnson was fifth in the SEC with total sacks of 4.5 sacks this season. It's going to be another great transition there as well. David, are we interested in any more players from the transfer portal, or it is a wrap for this offseason taking in players? I know the linebacker out of University of Southern California, everyone writes down his name, but nobody can pronounce it.
Right.
Anything else about him moving forward? I know Michigan State was also a heavy lean. His brother does go there. Ohio State. Someone said Ohio State. I don't know if that was just blattering out things, but that was another school someone wrote.
Yeah, I wouldn't write it off, but as we know, the counters are full for the spring semester, right? So if Miami does get a transfer announcement, that player will have to wait until August to enroll. So Miami does have time to evaluate further, because I think we would all be in agreement that it would be ideal if Miami could land a proven linebacker. So that would be the position. Gayo Teote, I think is how you say his name. I think he's an intriguing guy, right? So if he's going to be patient and wait to make a decision, or if he's willing to announce that he wants to, for instance, let's say he wants to announce he wants to go to Miami, but he understands he's going to have to wait till August to enroll. I think that would make sense too. But do I think that's the last transfer addition before they play Alabama? I do not think so. I think they're going to continue to be active. It all depends on the market, right? So if a good player enters the portal at a position that they feel like they need, they're going to pounce. They're going to make a move. So I don't think, and that player might not even be in the portal right now, right? There's still going to be spring football. Coaching changes have happened. And maybe after going through spring, players on these teams decide they don't want to play for that coach anymore, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be more action. I don't think it's over.
And that includes our team as well, right? One thing I want to bring up with bringing in a transfer proven receiver in Charleston Rambo, you're now looking at pretty much 11 to 12 guys in that wide receiver room. David, my question to you is, I'm real curious to figure out who is kind of that number 3 receiver, because in my opinion, you kind of solidified your 1-2 punch in Harley and Rambo. A lot of people try to make the comparison between the two. They have a similar running style, how they kind of catch and run with the ball. One's just a little taller than the other. I'm really interested to see who ends up being that third guy, whether we put Harley in the slot or he ends up being an outside guy with Rambo, and we kind of make that third guy a slot guy. And kind of the expectations on other guys like a Pope and a Wiggins. Let's say someone like a Xavier Restrepo or Keyshawn Smith or a Mike Redding end up stepping up this year and being that third guy. What ends up happening to not only those older veterans, but some of the younger guys like Jeremiah Payton, Daz Worsham that hasn't really gotten the burn? What's your expectations in the wide receiver room?
So if I'm going to project, I would probably say it'll most likely be Rambo on the outside, Harley still working the slot. And then I do, like, if I'm just going to keep it real, I think the third guy is probably going to be Wiggins or Pope. I think if a guy has a chance to supplant them, it's Keyshawn Smith. He is very intriguing with his speed. Like, when you watch him live in person, it's impressive. Like, he's got a different gear. So he could be the guy that pushes them for that spot. And then, I don't understand what's happened with Jeremiah Payton, to be honest. Seeing him in high school, he was a stud, kind of similar to Mark Pope, right? I was a big Mark Pope fan from what he showed in high school. For whatever reason, it has not translated at the college level. I hope that's not what's happening with Jeremiah Payton, but he is also a very talented guy. But honestly, like, I do think, Rob Likens is a fan of some of the things that D. Wiggins and Mark Pope do. Now, obviously, you got to catch the ball. I mean, that's part of playing receiver. So they obviously need to clean that up. And look, it's a perfect situation for Miami, right? Either they're going to step up and improve in that regard, because they do have talent. Like, D. Wiggins is fast and he's 6'3". Mark Pope has some wiggle to him. He can create separation. He has some big playability. It's just that contested catch, man. They can't bring that to the field. And I think it's at the point now where if they can't get that done, they're gonna give other guys shots and see if they can take it and run with it. But yeah, I would look at Keyshawn Smith. Honestly, he'd be the guy. And then Romello Brinson. He's a freshman, but he's got some of that ability too.
He does. I think all three of the freshmen, man. I think the trio. This is the best trio of freshmen we've gotten in one class, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Since you go back to like the 01 days, honestly, man, like they all have something different about them that they bring to the table. Yeah. I mean, you got Rashard Smith that kind of does it all. He's like our Jeff Thomas 2.0 in a sense, but a little bit more physical. You got a Jacoby George that kind of plays a little bit of everything, and then Romello Brinson, like you said, has that head honcho in him where like he wants to be that number one guy, and he goes up and gets it, man. He's a football player, and I think that's the key I have seen in this recruiting class is that we have a bunch of football players, a bunch of dogs, and a bunch of people that love the University of Miami. They're bought in from the beginning. I mean, they're not even at Greentree yet, and they're already hitting Jake Garcia up, wanting to start throwing, and he just got off an airplane. You know what I mean? I really like that in this class.
And honestly, last thing, just the third receiver, if you're just talking strict pass catchers, it's probably Will Mallory, right? So he'd probably be the guy.
No, I've been stating Will Mallory for so long, throughout the season. I think, honestly, if you need a deep ball threat, he's 6'5". He ran track and field in high school. Give him a shot out on the boundary, And we're in the ACC competition level. There's not a lot of corners.
Don't sleep on my guy, Elijah Arroyo. He is going to be an early enrollee as well. I got to interview him. That kid, he loves football, man. And his favorite Hurricane player is Jimmy Graham, and I think they have a lot of similarities. Yep. And him and Will Mallory in the red zone, those are two big body targets that are willing to go up and get the ball. It's going to be interesting.
Yes.
One thing Miami's been missing, is that XFactor receiver. We haven't had that in quite a while. A go-to guy where it's third down, right. 3rd and 10. He's going to get the football. Can you stop him? I think Amon Richards, when he came, he was that X factor receiver, and a guy like Leonard Hankerson in the past, who would have just have video game numbers, for example. We're missing that at the University of Miami, and we know what to expect with Mike Harley. I think he's going to have a really nice final season of college football. He's kind of transitioning into that receiver I always thought he would be. We're just finally. He has the right offensive scheme. Remember, this guy was committed to West Virginia. It was Miami or West Virginia. I think under Dana Holgorsen, he would have shined in a West Virginia offense. But David, do you think Charleston Rambo can be that X factor receiver at the University of Miami, where he can win you one or two football games?
So I don't know about that, but I do think he's an upgrade, right? So when I think of an X factor receiver, I think of a guy that makes those contested catches at a consistent level. I'm just not sure he is that guy. I think he's more of a, catch the ball in space and outrun the defense type guy. So if a corner is, has him covered, is he a guy that can still make a tough catch? I don't know. I mean, maybe he can be that guy, but at Oklahoma, I don't know if he necessarily showed that ability. He's good on deep posts. He's good on crossers, and you hit him in space, he can take off and run. So, Brad said it, like he's kind of like a bigger Mike Harley. I would agree with that. I kind of view him in that way too. You get him the ball in space, he can outrun the defense.
And I'll say this, I mean, that was one of the things I looked in that I really liked about Samori Toure out of Montana was that he wasn't the prettiest receiver in the portal because of where he played at. But if you look up his resume, he matched as far as the accolades, as far as stats. He was academic Heisman, so he's very intelligent. He, in my opinion, really fit the KJ Osborne bill. Yeah. And if you turn on his tape, I mean, he is big, he plays big, he goes and gets the contestant catches. He's just not the speedy guy like a Rambo. Right. I don't think he is. I think Rambo has the more glorified, when you turn on the tape, it's more exciting. So that X factor kind of pops out a little bit more in your head. And I think, to both of y'all's point, I think that's what I think that's what Coach Likens in last year was looking for. Right. Was not necessarily the more conservative move, someone that's kind of like a security blanket, but a guy that can take the roof off and kind of make a play in one play. And I think that's what Rambo does.
Yep.
Guys, I know we just mentioned a few 2021 players. Are there any players that stand out that you think will be making an impact year one? I think everyone can think of the first two names: Leonard Taylor, James Williams. Maybe those guys are your answers, but if not, who else in that class can really make an impact as a true freshman?
You want to go first, David?
Well, I'm a big Leonard Taylor fan. Like I think the guy's a freak. He's probably the best defensive tackle recruit I've ever seen from South Florida, and I've seen a bunch of guys, right? So I would say him. And then the other guy I would say is probably his teammate from Palmetto, Brashard Smith. I think he's got a chance to, make an impact. I just think he's really good as a slot receiver. And then, Brad touched on Elijah Arroyo. I don't see why he can't be the number 2 tight end, right, in this offense. So I would say those three.
I will definitely offense. I'll definitely go with my guy Elijah Arroyo. I think, like David said, man, he's pretty much going to be tight end 2 in my opinion. It's going to be hard to keep his size off the field. Once he gets into that Feely program, he's going to fill out tremendously. He's a great athlete, not just football, so I think that's going to help him. The other offensive guy I would throw out there is Lawrence Seymour. I think he has the potential to kind of rise very early. I think that offensive line group, man, this is going to be the first time in a very long time where almost every position on that line is going to be open competition. And I think there's a lot of guys on this roster that can move around and play multiple positions, which ultimately helps Coach Garen Justice. And as far as the defense, the obvious answers is obviously James Williams or Leonard Taylor. But I'm going to go with my favorite defensive player, and that is going to be Cam Kitchens. I think Cam Kitchens is the best safety on this football team. Like David said, the instincts is there. Being coached by Kenny Phillips from time to time, going to a nice high school. He plays at Northwestern, but I believe he goes to William Tutt or Turner. And so I know he's super intelligent, very smart guy, and I think he just has all the willpower. I mean, he's just one of those kids that loves football. He's a very quiet guy, similar to like Jaquan Johnson, but he just goes in, checks out. This is like a job to him, and I think those are the guys that especially treat this like it's their job year one, kind of benefit the program.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, I completely agree. Brashard Smith, I think just his speed is so elite. Another guy whose measurements you just can't teach, James Williams. I mean, his profile is a defensive end at the Power 5 level. We're putting him at safety, put him at striker. It doesn't matter. He's just a freak athlete. You can't teach those measurements. Lastly, Romello Brinson, what he did to Jason Marshall Jr. in high school, I'm telling you, man, I think that was a little bit of an insight of what we're going to see at the next level.
Yeah, no, Romello is very good, and he's probably one of the more slept-on guys in their class, but he has a chance to be a very productive player.
David, question for you. We have been wanting to get an update on Vonte Williams. From everything I've heard, he's still not medically cleared as far as physical play. I know his next time getting checked in with the university was going to be sometime this month. Have you heard anything or a timetable for that, or is it still kind of same thing that we've been hearing?
Yeah, I don't have anything definitive, but other than they are hopeful that he will be back, right? But has that happened yet? Has he officially been cleared? No. But yes, hopefully he can make a healthy return because he's a big time player. He was my favorite player in the state of Florida for the last recruiting cycle. So. He is a big time player. So
if he ever did get cleared, I mean, me personally, in a perfect world, I essentially see Cam Kitchens and Avante being your safeties and James Williams being your striker. Like that is where you pretty much get the most bang for your buck out of those three guys. But that's just me. But the guy I'm curious about is Chase Smith. I think that's a guy that's been getting lost in all of this. Whether what position he plays or just him being a slept-on 4-star, that's another guy that I'm interested to see in this defense.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy I know he's probably going to start at striker, but he might end up as a weak side linebacker. So he's a guy that just has a ton of length, ton of athleticism, and it's going to be, how much weight can he put on it in the strength and conditioning program. And I agree. Like, I think in terms of potential and upside, there aren't many guys in this class that have more than him.
We got a comment about Joaquin Gonzalez. I'm sure everyone's aware, of the tweeting and kind of his criticism over the program. David, as someone who covers the University of Miami, I mean, we've seen this rodeo before with Dan Cilio when Miami was blown out by Kansas State, the whole Manhattan, Kansas thing. So it's not the first time an alumni is mad. And I'm sure Joaquin Gonzalez is not the only person who played at the University of Miami that is upset of the University of Miami's, football performance, under Manny Diaz. There's other people as well, I'm sure, that are very upset. David, what are your thoughts, on Joaquin Gonzalez's resentment, going on at the University of Miami?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair. I think, Joaquin has earned the right to voice his opinions, right? National champion, All-American. So
academic Heisman too.
Yeah. So, I think if he wants to voice his opinions, I think it's fair. And I think it is something that I think holds weight, right? So, and look, I think the bottom line with any of these former greats, right? The standard is extremely high. The standard is national championship level. And so if Miami's not at that standard, a lot of those guys aren't going to be happy. And I think that's fair, right? But I think within that point, it is fair to point out that it's a process getting there. And so it's not like a light switch where you can turn it on in 1 year. I think it has to build. And I think, I would assume Joaquin could look at this roster and see the holes in terms of talent that the roster does have. Now it's up to Manny to fix that through recruiting or the transfer portal or whatever. But yes, I mean, there are issues, and I think Joaquin shines a light on a lot of those issues in a fair way. And And honestly, like people's opinions don't bother me at all. So I don't get upset by them as a UM alum or whatever. And if he wants to voice his opinions, I think that's more than fair.
Yeah, and I mean, to both y'all's point, I mean, when I got to speak to Joaquin for a little bit, I mean, he's an old school guy, any of the old school guys are going to have that same mentality. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm sure Ed Reed probably thinks the same way Joaquin does, but I mean, the platform that Ed Reed is on and what he's doing as far as a job, he's not able to express his opinions in that way. So someone like Joaquin or a guy like Brett Romberg, for instance, those guys have the ability to voice their opinion that I'm sure a lot of the other older guys that played with them feel. And I think to his point, he does have a point, but at the same time, you do have to be a little bit more realistic. One thing I brought up with Joaquin when I talked to him was just social media in general, right? I mean, there's a huge gap from when they played, how easy it was to kind of just get off a bus, do your work, stay out the streets, and pretty much practice and get out. Where now a lot of kids have their phone right next to them, right? Like you have to videotape everything in order to get out there. One click of a button, anything that you have done is now on a platform where anyone can see, which I think is something that hinders a lot of these young men playing football now, that a lot of these older guys, when I talked to Joaquin, didn't really even have to think about, right? I mean, one of the things we talked about was if he was head coach, one rule he would have for these players is as soon as spring camp started, turn in your phones. Like that's not realistic, you know what I mean? But I do see Joaquin's point. Things do need to be made. I think the frustration with Joaquin was he got to see it firsthand as far as playing it, and then he also got to see it firsthand, not last year, but when I believe Coach Barry was there, him and another guy, I believe it was Romberg, were able to go to the practice field a couple of times and kind of see how they do things. And I think that's where he was a little disappointed as well, which is how they were running things. And I think it's slowly getting better. Again, you got to remember that was Manny Diaz's pretty much first go around as a head coach. He's slowly learning, like we see, and it's just going back to the beginning of the show, man. We're taking steps, not leaps, unfortunately, but we're taking steps in the right direction, which is the main picture we got to look at.
David, we can feel it in the air as fans. The comment section is going crazy about this question. I don't say it's divided. I think it's majority over minority. A lot of people believe this is a make or break season. We just saw it with the Joaquin Gonzalez tweets. I'm sure more alumni that play at the University of Miami are mad. I'm sure graduates of the University of Miami, students, are upset as well. Some people say give it more time. What is the sense inside of the program regarding Manny Diaz going into year 3? Is the pressure on Manny Diaz for keeping Blake Baker as defensive coordinator, taking over play calling duties? Are people aware of that matter, or is everyone still on a wait and see approach? Because this season, this non-conference schedule, this is no joke. We got Alabama game 1. We saw how we performed against Clemson on prime time. Right. North Carolina, another up and coming program. I think they're doing a very good job. We have a very good Mel Tucker football team at Michigan State. He's going to have them playing all 4 quarters, not giving up till the game is over. And App State, that's a pretty scrappy football team as well. So, what's kind of the sense inside the program regarding Manny Diaz going into year 3?
I don't think the pressure is as high as it was after last season. And that's just a product of, last season was disastrous, right? You lose to FIU, Duke, and Louisiana Tech to close out the year. The pressure was legitimate this offseason, and people inside the program knew it, right? But I will say, to that point, in a way, they stepped up, right? And they recruited at a higher level. They had a more successful season than the previous year. So in terms of, do I think it's a make or break year in 2021 with Manny Diaz's job? I would probably say no. I mean, you never say never. Like, if a disastrous type season happens, then yes, that opinion does change, right? But I don't feel that sense right now. I do think it's make or break in terms of Manny taking advantage of an opportunity to continue this trajectory, right? So I think we will know after the 2021 season whether Manny can get Miami to a level where Miami's consistently winning at least 10 games a year. Because I think that should be the expectation in 2021. If this team doesn't win at least 10 games, I think that's going to be a bad sign. I think, recruiting is a reflection in a lot of ways at Miami of the success on the field. So if Miami's not having a successful season, the recruiting class in 2022 is probably going to be, an average class by a Miami standard, right? But if they do have that 10-win type of season, I think they can stack another talented recruiting class on top of this one, and then you get things rolling a little bit. So I don't think in terms of Manny's job security, it's a make or break type year, but I think it's a make or break type year to know, okay, can Manny be the guy, or is it going to be still kind of up in the air after this 2021 season, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think the benefit to all this is we're going to see if he's the guy real early, right? Paul just brought up, the Bama game, Michigan State, and Appalachian State, 3 out of your 4 games. Those aren't easy W's to just write off. And I think if for some crazy way we were to lose 2 out of those 3 games that I just mentioned, I think that's when we're going to kind of put a lot of focus on Manny Diaz. He's going to have to turn this around really quick and win a lot of football games, because it could turn into a disaster to where this could be his last season. But I think it's going to stack. He's stacking all the chips on him and his guys, and I think this is going to be where he kind of finds out if he could be the head coach for the Miami Hurricanes. And I think at the end of the day, where he is on the right path to do some great things. It's just like David said, man, we got to keep stacking and stacking.
In a lot of ways, this past year, it's corny to say, but it was a step forward for this program. They won all the games they were supposed to win, right? Yep. I think you could argue North Carolina's probably better than Miami last year. Oklahoma State was kind of a toss-up, but maybe you could argue, okay, Mike Gundy's been there. He's got that program going. So maybe they were the better team than Miami, right? Clemson, of course, is at a different level right now. But Miami won 8 games that they should have won, that they were the better team, and they won those games. That hasn't been the case at Miami for the past, 15 years. So, again, it's corny to say, but that was a step forward for this program. I think the step forward in 2021 is to start winning the games where you're not
big time games.
Yeah, you got to win the games that matter. And I'm not saying expect a win over Alabama. But you need to be competitive. You need to be more competitive than you were against Clemson this year, right? Yep. So essentially beat the spread, right? Get it closer than what Las Vegas thinks it'll be.
And to your point, this was an odd year, not only for COVID, but it almost seemed like you had to have a high-powered offense to pretty much keep up with teams this year. And it really came down to if your defense can make that extra stop, because it almost seemed like that some of the best teams in the country that we see every single year as far as defense, they weren't statistically there this year. And that could have been due to COVID. But you look at the teams like the North Carolinas, teams where their defenses weren't that good, but their offense were so potent to where they just had to have that one extra stop. Or you look at Miami, we're kind of on the reverse end of things that we're not used to, where our offense was a little bit more potent and our defense just lacked tremendously. And I think that benefited a team like Oklahoma State that we saw in the bowl game, who their offense dropped off a little bit, but not that much. But it was their defense that took that next step, where they were actually a top 25 defense in college football this year. So I think that is also a key to look at.
All right, let's do a quick Q&A before we wrap things up. Is there any official announcement or decision from Amari Carter returning next season?
No, still waiting on that. I don't know, honestly, what to expect from that. I could see a lot of different scenarios happen. And I guess we'll find out soon, because I think they're set to start school next week, right? So decision should come soon.
I would think, if I'm not mistaken, David, I think they were technically they were supposed to notify the team already, but I think that was on the 10th. They were supposed to know if they were declaring for the draft or kind of returning. So I think at this point, it's more of just like an announcement to the public, I would assume, right?
Well, it could be that, or it could be a transfer, right? I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but maybe he decides to move on, right? Because he does have that extra year.
I know it's very early. What are our early predictions on this non-conference schedule going into conference play?
My record prediction?
Yeah, for non-conference.
So I think they'll probably lose to Alabama, but I do think, I think they should be 3-1. Michigan State, honestly, they landed the Temple quarterback, right? Anthony Russo, I think, transfer quarterback who started a ton of games at Temple. So he improves their quarterback situation. But, just watching them a little bit.
They did beat Northwestern.
Yeah.
They did beat Northwestern.
But they're not they're not great yet. So I would hope Miami could win that game. App State, they are a dangerous Group of 5 team. But I don't think they were better. I don't think they're going to be better than what Miami faced in UAB this year.
I think Chase Bryce transferred there from Duke.
Yep. So
we've seen him already.
So Miami should win that game, and then the FCS game should be a win.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's 3-1 as well. I think the other two games in the App State and Michigan State, it's going to be how we win, in my opinion. What kind of tells me how this team's going to be. And still with the Alabama game too, man. I want to see how much our trenches specifically improves. Like our offensive line in particular, that's who I'm going to be looking at the most against Alabama, because this is going to be year 2 under Coach Justice. We've kind of heard and seen the development of what Coach Justice could bring, not only from a physical aspect on the field, but some of the guys that he's brought in the past 2 years. We're finally able to create quality depth. And David mentioned earlier in the show, in the guard position, I think going up against a big SEC defensive line like Alabama specifically, that's where the guards and the tackles are going to have to be more big-bodied guys. I think the guys like Kai Clark are going to get mauled, where you're gonna need a Jalen Rivers, you're going to need a Donaldson, you're going to need potentially Isaiah Walker, some of the bigger guys. If you're able to put Isaiah Walker, a Jared Williams, the Jalen Rivers, and then you add Donaldson or Scaife, 4 out of your 5 guys are potentially 6'5", 6'6", or bigger. I think that's what we've been missing. And when you go up against Alabama, you're going to need that. And there could potentially be other guys that are going to have to rotate in, because as we know, first game of the season, people are going to get knocked around.
Yeah, that Bama game is going to be a measuring stick, right? So if Miami gets blown out, who knows what to make of that? Obviously, probably not a great sign. But if Miami's competitive, there's a good chance Miami is definitely a top 10 team. And if they keep improving during the course of the season, who knows what happens, right?
David, what's D'Eriq King's status right now? What is the expectation? He did tear his ACL. I guess I'm not a medical expert by all means, so this could be irrelevant. But I think during the surgery, you find out more how severe the injury is what I've seen from people. So, what's the expectation at Miami regarding D'Eriq King, and how do you think they'll handle it?
Everyone expects him to be back. Everyone in the program expects him to be back by the start of fall camp. Now, surgery went well, all that stuff. So the next things to look out for are just these setbacks, right? So that would happen with potential infections or little tweaks, little maybe injuries that might happen during the rehab process by pushing things too much. So if those things do not happen, he's gonna be back by August, fall camp, which is the best case scenario, honestly. So end of July, he's telling everyone he feels like he'll be back, or the expectation is to be back end of July, early August. So as of now, everything's fine. But again, it's these setbacks that you just don't see coming that could change that timeline. So hopefully those things don't happen.
David, I got an interesting question for you I just thought of. Coach Tavares Robinson comes in and he will be coaching the secondary, right? Who has a bigger jump this year because of Coach Robinson? DJ Ivy or Gervin Hall?
Ooh.
I'll go Gervin only because I don't understand why he took a step back this year. So I think he has more of a step forward to make. So I will go with Gervin. So, I think Gervin had a chance to be one of the better players on the team going into the season. It didn't happen. I think he was dealing with some minor little injuries here and there that hampered his play. So yeah, I'll go Gervin.
Okay.
The last question I got before we wrap it up, class of 2022, what local recruits should fans be looking out for?
Yeah, so I think, I like to stick to the local recruiting, right? So when I'm looking at the local recruiting for this 2022 class, I want to see what they pull, particularly at defensive end, right? Because it's loaded in South Florida at defensive end. You got Shamar Stewart, Marvin Jones Jr., Kenyatta Jackson, Dante Anderson, Daniel Lyons, right? Yeah, Francois. Is it Francois? Francis?
I think it's France. I think it is Francois Knowlton. You might be right on.
Nylek Kelly. I don't know how to say his name either, but he's a Florida State commit. All these guys are 4-star guys, right? All these guys are big-time guys. So which ones will Miami end up getting? And will Miami get one of those premier guys? And one of those premier guys I'm referring to like Shamar Stewart, Marvin Jones Jr., or Kenyatta Jackson. So I think that's a key position to look out for. And then the other one would be corner, right? You hire T-Rob. You got DVD on the trail. It's time to start keeping some of those big-time local corners home. So Earl Little Jr. is the obvious one. Obviously, Miami legacy. So you would hope Miami has a strong chance there. And then his teammate Jacoby Spells is an intriguing guy too.
Yep. Kamari Rogers, I believe, and you got Trevell Mullen.
Right. The next Mullen. So
as well. Look out for it.
I think the safety. I think the safeties. I think we have to land the two safeties in Kamari and Alfonso. I think those will be two game changers that you stack. If Vonte is cleared, even if Vonte isn't cleared, let's just say you stack a James Williams and Cam Kitchens with the Alfonso and Kamari back-to-back classes.
Right.
Man.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean the recent safety classes have been strong under Ephraim Banda. So keep stacking. This whole thing, like college football, honestly, like why is Alabama? Why is Ohio State? Why is Clemson always in the college football playoff? They are stacking talent, the type of talent you're speaking to.
Yeah.
So when Miami gets to that level, it's going to happen on the back end. They're going to start competing at the highest level as well. So, T-Rob was brought here for that reason. Got to start winning those battles. And if he does that, that's a good sign.
And even a team like Florida, I live in Gainesville, David, so I hear about Florida all the time, and they have 10 to 12 corners in their cornerback room year after year, and they're able to land 4 to 5 corners every single recruiting class that are 4 stars, and yet we're missing out on them. And I think you brought a great point that's where T-Rob comes in the conversation. My thing is, who's the bigger land, in my opinion, between Earl Little or Wesley Basante? Because I think those are two guys in two position groups where we have been missing. And since going back to 2017, it seems like we haven't landed a great linebacker coming out of high school. And I think that's where a kid like Wesley, man, who obviously loves Miami a lot. Same thing with Earl Little.
Miami's in a good spot for both.
Yes.
I would they're both very good prospects. I would probably give the edge just as a pure prospect to Wesley. I think he's a stud, right? So yeah, he gives you that athletic, modern day outside linebacker that can do everything: coverage, attack the line of scrimmage, all that stuff. So he'd be a big time addition as well.
All right.
That's it.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining the show tonight.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
It was fun. Anytime. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, David. Thank you.
To everyone that was watching tonight's show, we greatly appreciate it. And always all about the you guys. Take care.
Take care, guys.